Early this year, fandom began dissolving a variety of wikis about queer identity and community into a brand new LGBTQIA+ wiki, citing a want to consolidate these resources into one place and to avoid repetition. In the process of this, hundreds of pages, largely about microlabels, were deemed unworthy of migration and not given a place to live in this new resource. A much needed cleanup or a violent erasure? Let's talk microlabels. Microlabel is a term which describes language in relation to gender, sexual or romantic identity that would fall under the umbrella of another piece of language, and yeah, a lot of folks aren't necessarily a fan of them. Finally, a thing that the right and the left can agree on, an absolute disdain for microlabels. Why do you need a word just for yourself? You special snowflake, you individualist. As far as I'm concerned, you're either normal or you're a If you're too embarrassed of your degeneracy to call yourself I'm happy to call you that myself. As queer folks, we haven't come all this way to keep splintering into smaller and smaller groups. We aren't going to win our rights just by convincing people to use the right words. Stop trying to divide us with hyper-specific language. So does that mean I'm about to grace you all with a heavily centrist take? I fucking hope not. I'm kind of actually a little worried that that's where I'm accidentally going to land, as there's a whole bunch of centrists out there who agree with me on this. Not people who call themselves centrists. They'd probably react to the whole microlabel question like, never heard that word before, gonna need you to stop using it so I can continue to not have to question anything about the world I live in, thanks. No, the kind of pro-microlabel centrists I'm thinking about probably think they are on the left. They're liberals, and I've been doing a lot of work to try and distance myself from that liberal way of thinking about things. I mean, I owe it to my family who left Chile in the 70s not to be swept away by neoliberalism. But you read the title. I still think microlabels are worthwhile, so this is me posing a defense of them to the left, to say, I see your concerns, but I kind of think this concept is one we should keep around, at least in certain circumstances. So now, after thoroughly alienating my entire audience, let me begin my defense by talking a bit more about how the actions of fandom, the corporation, not fan communities. Don't you hate it when bloody corporations have to name themselves after things that already exist? Let me begin my defense by talking a bit more about the actions of fandom and how they effectively worked to erase a community effort to chronicle and make accessible the nuances of language we use to describe ourselves. When the Great Wiki merger happened, I immediately saw an outcry from my ACE and ARO communities, and later from communities I was not a part of, like the intersex community. The first criticism was how fandom had made the merger decision without consulting any of the mods or contributing members of the other wikis they had decided to dissolve. Just 3 days after announcing the changes, URLs initially describing any of the original wiki resources were now directed to the new LGBTQIA+ wiki, despite it not yet being fully built. For an example of this, the link in my Alterous Attraction video, which previously took you to the LGBTA wiki, now takes you to a dead page on the LGBTQIA+ wiki. Fun. Directly after the merger, people noted a drastic reduction of pages being supported. The LGBTA wiki had hosted over 6,000 pages, and upon its deletion, only 130 pages were hosted on the LGBTQIA+ wiki, which replaced it. Even today, months on from this merger, deletion, whatever you want to call it, the fandom LGBTQIA+ wiki still only has 155 active pages. Whether you like microlabels or not, this was very much a corporation stepping in and with a snap of their fingers, cutting out several community resources that had for the longest time been created and maintained by community. This is not something I think anyone even mildly sympathetic with class struggle or the ongoing fight for queer rights could agree with. A for-profit company literally just stepped in and created all these standards for the language a marginalized community was allowed to use. Without any consultation or oversight, this wasn't just a new shitter corporate resource, it was one that strong-armed out all of the community resources that had already been filling the need this new wiki claimed to serve, from long before it was even conceived of. So, In the end, this whole discussion is about how we define and talk about queerness, and who gets to control and decide that. The LGBT Wiki's sourcing policy mandates that all content within it be verifiable. To them, this means excluding social media, personal experiences, or unofficial community resources like the very wikis it was stepping up to replace. Now, having clear sources is not a bad thing to strive for. It's actually something I should be doing better in my videos, but failing to consider anything that happens on a more social, personal, or community level whilst pushing out resources that previously filled that need is a problem. Because if we define queerness only by what academics, publishers, or journalists are putting out into the world, then our definitions of queer identity are always going to be out of date. This is for two reasons. Firstly, because community is constantly changing and redefining itself at rather a rapid rate. And secondly, because these institutions, academia, the publishing industry, traditional media, etc., aren't usually interested in talking about queerness in the same way community is. Historically, we've seen a lot of erasure and misrepresentation of queer ideas, from Nazi book burnings to the media's insistence at the existence of a trans lobby or gender whisperers. And even when these mainstream sources are open to sharing queer-positive ideas, these verifiable mediums often aren't quite on the pulse of things. Unless something is news, most positive journalism about the queer community has to go through the process of pitching and being accepted by an editor, which can take some time, and even then, it's often the least subversive takes that make it through. To query, write, and then publish a book is a process that can take years, much in the same way as academic research. The internet and offline community groups are where the queer community develops its language and ideas, and so to ignore them as a valuable resource, to deny the expertise of lived experience, seems foolhardy to me. Because as society changes, the way we think about queerness changes. What we describe today as queer identity doesn't map well onto figures of the past who likely define themselves by what they did or who they did, more so than looking at queerness as something that was and is an intrinsic part of the self. I bring all this up to say that queerness and the language we use to talk about it will always be evolving, and to deny the most recent evolution of that language simply for the fact that it's new, less mainstream, or poorly documented, well, to me that seems not just foolish, but potentially dangerous, because much of what is well documented and published medicalizes queer experience or lets microaggressions seep through. If you can't trust the expertise of living, breathing, active queer community members, then you're only really supporting the aspects of the queer community that have evolved the least and been closest to maintaining the status quo. So hopefully by now I've got you on board with the fact that the erasure of community resources and the language within is a bad thing. Now let's talk about why I think microlabels are good, actually. You know that thing that was in the title of the video? Fuck, I'm riddled with ADHD. The first argument I thought for this is not my strongest. That one I'll save to the end, so I can go out with a bang. It's definitely the least asexual thing I've said today. But I thought of it first because it kind of rings true to me. Microlabels give questioning queers a way into the community. If I hadn't heard someone referring to themselves as cisgenderless back in 2013, I may have just continued to squash into silence all of my gender feelings and never come out as non-binary because I didn't hate my assigned gender that much. I didn't have a right to be non-binary when there were people out there with real dysphoria. Poor fool. Too used to the steadily rising heat to realize you're boiling alive, hey? Yeah, that was me. Me in a nutshell. But I did find a way in eventually, because there were other words that didn't feel as far away from the closet to me, that I could reach without crossing what my scared little egg brain saw as a point of no return. That's not to imply that microlabels exist just as stepping stones to more known queer identities. Absolutely not. Many people come to more specific terms after looking at all the known ones and wanting more, but for me, and others I've spoken to, the little nuances microlabels can offer sometimes feel like a lot more of a welcoming place to quietly start to consider where you might fit in the broader queer community. And look, I get that most people won't identify with the majority of microlabels out there. But if it helps even one person escape that dark hole of feeling broken and alone, I think there's merit there. Feeling lost, feeling broken, these are awful places for an individual to be, but furthermore, they're the kind of feelings that keep you hiding from the world instead of out there trying to move us towards a better one. I, for one, don't want to see large swaths of the queer community forced to cower away in dark little closets because their community wouldn't accept the nuances of who they are. I want to see them by our side, fighting with us. And then there's the argument that you can't be what you can't see. I don't like this argument heaps because, well, if it was true, then we'd all be carbon copies of one another. But there is truth in the idea that hearing and seeing others leading a life that you might have yet to imagine for yourself, that makes the pursuit of your reality, your truth, so much easier. So it's not so much that you can't be what you can't see, just that it's more difficult to get there. The great benefit that the queer community brings to society is this widening of what is possible, what is acceptable, and having language and people who model that further widening of possibility is a plus to me. And this brings me to the main reason I think microlabels are valuable, because they help us have deeper conversations about gender, about sex, about romance, about relationships. As someone who's been yelling about queer issues for almost a decade now, I'm tired of doing the Trans 101 or ACE 101 or General Queer 101 over and over and over. I'm much more interested in the conversations that go beyond, here's what the things are, to unpack heteronormativity, monosexism, metanormativity, cisnormativity, to realize just how diverse queer experiences are and to celebrate that. One of the things I love most about the ASPEC community is the way our mere existence encourages us to question so much that is the norm in terms of how we relate to each other. People on the ACE and ARO spectrums ask why we put such emphasis on gender when there might be other more important factors that can influence our experience of attraction. We ask what it might mean to look favorably upon a kind of relationship that maybe doesn't align with your experience of attraction. Could we have these conversations without microlabels? Of course. But are microlabels useful in having these conversations? Absolutely. Having agreed upon terms to talk about these specificities means that we don't need to get stuck, say, doing Egosexual 101 or Alterous 101, and can start to get into the weeds of what these ideas mean for us as individuals, as a community, as a society. There are plenty of parts of the world that use hyper-specific language that I will likely never get my head around. Marine biology, law, ballet, that's fine. I'm not a part of those worlds. I'm not a scientist, a mechanic, a rugby player. There will be a lot of language that will be used by the people who are in those communities that will sound like absolute gibberish to me. But that doesn't mean I get to tell marine biologists not to talk about pomocanitate. This is the problem with me writing words that I don't understand in my script. But that doesn't mean that I get to tell the marine biologist not to talk about pomocanthidae. But that doesn't mean that I get to tell the marine biologist not to talk about
Pomocanthidae
when the larger category of fish exists. My lack of education on a topic doesn't mean that I can tell the mechanic not to talk about various valves and shit that make up a car when I still haven't worked out the difference between a hatch and a sedan. To progress the conversation beyond the broad and into the minutiae, smaller, more specific words are a useful and in some cases necessary tool. In imagining a world beyond what we have today, I would argue that many microlabels are needed for this reason. That said, is the wider world ready for that kind of conversation? To be honest, I don't think so. This is why I've spent so much of my time as a queer activist having that 101 level conversation over and over and over again. People are still engaging with our most basic concepts for the first time, so if a person doesn't even know that asexual people exist, they might not be ready to hear about acrosexual just yet. They certainly won't quite be ready to help us completely destroy metanormativity. That's fine. We all have to start our journey somewhere, which is why I keep having those 101 conversations. Because even though I'm kind of bored of them, there are still people out there who need them. Just like it would be overwhelming for me to attempt to debug a bunch of code without knowing the relevant language, having microlabel deep discussions with people who are probably still at the 101 level would probably also not be a great idea. Does that mean that I think that folks who primarily identify with the microlabel should just shut up and let all the folks with the more normative identities do the talking? Of course I don't. We need every queer person who is able to step up and fight, because there are some of us who desperately need to hear that they've got a community of people behind them, that we've got their back. What was that about? From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs? We need anyone with a bit of fight left in them to help push us forward. But I do want my fellow lesser known language using humans to understand that sometimes we need to build a baseline first. The main identifier I use to describe myself is ASPEC. This is not a micro label, it's an umbrella label, but it has the same vibes of being less known to the general public. And to properly get to the crux of what it means, people need to have a baseline understanding of both the asexual and aromantic spectrums. This is the reason why, unless I have the time to unpack the intricacies of the term, or I'm talking directly to my community, I will often just identify as aro or ace. And when I'm educating people outside of the community, I may focus my energy on making sure they understand aromanticism or asexuality, even if that doesn't entirely capture the nuance of my feelings about sex, romance, and relationships. 'Cause I'm asexy, and I'm proud to be me, I'm proud to be me, yeah. Can't you see it's how I'm meant to be, it's how I'm meant to be. Because you haven't worked it out, I'm talking about asexuality. To those of us who do use these lesser-known terms, I know it can sometimes feel like the world is unwilling to listen to our experiences. Sometimes it can even feel like within our communities there are norms that we are never going to be able to meet. I felt that, which is why I feel the need to step up and defend microlabels. It is essential that we continue to develop our ideas and deconstruct the norms that exist to control and confine us. We need to be having discussions about what attraction even is and how it manifests in different kinds of relationships. Because the world needs to change, needs to broaden, and if we're taking things for granted even just within our own communities, then that's a problem. I'm focusing mostly on ASPEC fields in this video, because that's what my audience is most invested in, but also because I've seen other creators talk about it from other perspectives. Verily Bitchy has spoken about this in terms of the bi community and other multiply attracted folks, and Lily Alexandra has spoken about it in terms of gender. Both of their videos focus on Mogai as a movement rather than specifically microlabels, but microlabels are an important part of the discussion they both went into, and I encourage you to also watch their videos to try and get a broader perspective, even though I don't hold exactly the same position on this as either of them. I think that's because I've seen how vital the micro-label level discussions have been for my community. Matter-normativity is so deeply ingrained in everything society does, and I find it so normal and natural for my community to be playful and constructive with language like that, and to find smaller communities within the community. Because I've seen people make broad, overarching assumptions about what it is to be asexual that have shut people out. Or spaces that get the umbrella definition right but struggle to be both the safe space for sex repulse aces and a place where other aces can talk about their experience of sex. We need both of these things, and so I find it hard to be very judgmental of people who seek smaller groups and create language that better meets their needs. I see the argument that more language doesn't necessarily help us achieve tangible rights, and I agree. An important part of any fight, any argument, is the need to be understood by the people we want to change. This is why I encourage all of those who do primarily identify with a microlabel to connect with the community group whose fight and cause you share, even if you may have differing nuances of experience. This is why before the asexual community really gained much ground, aces would often ally themselves with bi people because, you know, we feel the same about all the genders, right? Queerness is about so much more than oppression, but we do more to make the world a better place if we stand side by side in true community with each other and fight until that oppression is gone than we do in our group discussions and in our aspirational and analytical thinking. We still need that. But it doesn't mean as much if it just stays in the world of language and never moves into actually building a community, building a movement. I think we need all of it. The fine detail, the questions, and the challenges to what we've long taken for granted within our community, and the umbrellas, the collectives that gather us together and make us so much stronger than we could possibly be alone. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate your patience with this one. It's taken me far longer to put out into the world than I ideally would have liked, but it's here! And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this matter. Just one rule, don't be a dick. Yeah. I also, like, it was my first time using a teleprompter, that's the word. So tell me what you thought. Again, don't be a dick, but I would appreciate your constructive feedback. I really do encourage you to check out Lily and Verity's videos on this topic, which are linked below. Lily's video in particular is just so well-rounded and well-researched. I don't think I would have bothered to make this video if I hadn't felt the need for an A-Spec voice in this discussion, because she approaches this topic in such good faith with bucket loads of research. Like, this video can't touch that. But I still felt like I had useful things to add, so here I am. Anyway, thanks for sticking around. Lots of love to all of my patrons whose support keeps me going, and to all of you, my subscribers and viewers who for some reason keep coming back to listen to the things I had to say. Thank you. I honestly appreciate all of your comments, likes, and shares so much, and as my subscriber rate grows, my little heart feels more and more chuffed, so thank you. Now go out there and join some queer mutual aid groups or something, and see you next time. Bye. I don't think I can do that transition anymore with the, yeah, see, teleprompter. I can't put my hand on my teleprompter.